Bible study, as I see it, from what I've read by various analysts on the internet, is often clouded by people's stance and placement within a religious two-party system. People often say that, for instance, YHWH or YHWH or Yahweh or the Lord, I am, is the only true God, and the other one is impostor or devil. Whereas, on the other side, sometimes Gnostic is the contention that Elohim is the true God and YHWH is the impostor or devil. Even when these two gods act in much the same way, they both bring down floods, they both wipe out humanity, both in the flood and at Sodom and Gomorrah, and in an inefficient way as we would normally see it in terms of storytelling. If there really were only one God, or one God that is not pretending to be two gods, there would be no reason for so many things in Genesis to be told twice. Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed, and both the Lord and God take credit for it, both Yahweh and Elohim. There are verses saying first that Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and then it says that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. If there were only one, you wouldn't say that twice. So there's a contention for power, not only in terms of the creation, because there are two creations in Genesis 1 and 2, but in terms of who can produce the most followers, the most loyal worshippers, and who can make the greatest demonstrations of loyalty from those people. This struggle, as I see it, happens quite directly in the book of Job. Job is first described as someone who fears God and turns away from evil, as if he is essentially a worshipper of God. But then there's an episode where YHWH brings in somebody called the Satan, which could mean the adversary or the prosecutor, a role rather than so much a being, and says, "What do you think of my servant, Job?" So in a sense, he's claiming that he's responsible for the good deeds that Job does, rather than Elohim or God. The response then is from Elohim, more or less. Job just does what are apparently good things because you reward him, you bless him, you make him rich, and you protect him from me. There's an implication here that the employer-employee relationship between YHWH and Job, or the owner-owned relationship, protects Job from the otherwise retributive actions of God. So God says, take away all of his rewards that you've given him to be a supposedly good person, and he will curse you. He will no longer act faithfully. Now, YHWH doesn't fully take God up on this challenge, or Elohim. He says, okay, essentially, I will withdraw all my protection except for his life. You can't take his life, you can take anything else you want. And agrees to a test of what sort of person Job is. So Satan leaves this setting, and what happens afterwards is that all Job's property and family is destroyed. And one of the servants comes back and says, fire came down from God and destroyed all the animals. So there's a direct implication that the person the being who acted as the Satan, the accuser, in the courtroom of the divine council of sons of God, then came out and performed the destructive acts upon Job. When this happens, though, Job does not tell the complete truth, even though he's been told by his servants that God did it. And he speaks at other times in the book about how he wishes God would just finish him off, or he asks God why God is doing this to him. Job never says, Satan is doing these things to me. All he ever says is that God, or the Lord, has a part in what's going on. And when he's lost everything he has, Job says, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, which is not, strictly speaking, the action of a truthful man, as I can see it, because the Lord allowed it to happen, withdrew his protection. But it was Elohim, or God, who carried out the destructive acts. So Job is not only siding with one deity to some extent over the other one, and giving one deity all the credit for the man he is, but doing what could quite thoroughly enrage the other deity in future. He's like sticking the knife in and saying, it's all you're doing, Yahweh. This guy has nothing to do with it. Which I suppose could lay the foundations of the future developments in the trials of Job from that point on. But this is something it seems to me that's under-acknowledged today, in that we have a political two-party system that more people are seeing isn't serving us, because we essentially choose between two different ways of not being able to do the right thing, not being able to choose life for ourselves. As one party has a death platform of one kind and the other party has a death platform of the other kind, but they're still both death platforms. Now, they're religiously, there's I think still an unacknowledged duality of much the same sort. Much like in Job, you can choose to be forced to do the presumably right thing because you're being bribed on one hand, or you can be forced to do the right thing presumably on the other hand because you're being scared. Neither of which is an act of a fully realized moral person who's doing something because it should eventually create a more fully justified moral world.